funny. I mean, it's very tempting to look at who I am today. It was not a straight line path. I did not know that I would get to where I am today. One of the first questions that we got asked, and the purpose is not to beat Bangalore. What I find is very often, what problem are you solving? There are three questions and why you?
Where did this whole building, founding thing get into you?
That was always something that I was curious about, so I would ask them, it seems. And so, that question of why, it's not just how and what. Especially as an entrepreneur. What I really liked about that was to do something that could change the world. That things like worry, they don't get you anywhere.
You have all sorts of people telling them, could you help us kind of understand this ecosystem piece a little bit more?
Corporates are realizing it's like a swarm of piranha versus just one big shark. As an entrepreneur, stick to what you know, bigger, better. So knowing when to quit.
Thanks. Hi, welcome to the Great Lakes podcast. As we complete 20 years as an institute, we bring to you conversations with 20 amazing leaders from various walks of life. Today, we have with us a person who signifies the word founder, Srinivas Kollipara, the person who built T-Hub and put Hyderabad on the global map, and today leads Biome, a venture studio. Welcome, Mr. Srinivas Kollipara.
Thanks for having me.
Before I get started, I mean, you've been founding things and, getting things rolling. How did this come to you? I mean, could you tell us something from your childhood? Is it people? Is it books? Where did it all begin? Where did this whole building, founding thing get into you?
So, as a child, I think my parents would tell me that I was constantly playing with stuff, fiddling with stuff, taking things apart, which is a good thing and a bad thing because sometimes they'd come home and find, the kitchen clock had been literally put into pieces. So I could figure out how to take it apart, couldn't figure out how to put it back together again. But that was always something that I was curious about, is how things work. In fact, my parents, like a lot of parents, were very frustrated with the number of whys that I would ask them, it seems. Beyond that, I think some of it probably came from my grandparents. They were, and my father, of course, but my father's father was a farmer. He lost his father when he was 14, and so had to work in the fields, from 5 a.m. until late in the night, until the sun set at least. One of the stories that we grew up with was the fact that he didn't want to give up on his education. He bought a dictionary because he thought that was the one book that would give him the most value for money, and ended up memorizing all of the words up to the word S, which I mean, that's crazy, right?
Wow.
But how he went ahead with that knowledge was he realized that there were a bunch of farmers and other people who had to be in their jobs in the daytime, couldn't attend school, but education was really important. And so he set up a series of night schools that educated thousands of people during his lifetime, and many of them went on to become engineers and doctors and other things as well. So that was one part of it, was just the tenacity of learning a dictionary to the word S, and then also applying, your own hardships and thinking, how can I solve this problem for other people? That's what I got from him. My grandfather on my mother's side was also quite an inspiration. He was a communist. He was a doctor. He set up his clinic in a small area, which ended up actually becoming a larger place later. But he set up hospitals and schools. He made money and donated land to do all of this stuff. But he would always tell me that being a communist, he was fairly nihilistic in a sense. Didn't believe in the religious side of things as much. And so he said, look, as long as we can help other people, it's a life worth living. And I think I took on some of that part, and I was inspired by that.
So there's clearly one rule that students have to learn. Hang around with your grandparents and grandfathers in particular a little bit.
Even my father, by the way, because, again, he went... So the other great thing about my grandfather on my father's side was, although, as I said, he was out in the fields and all of that, he realized the value of education and made sure that both of his sons went to medical college.
Wow.
My older uncle, my father's older brother, was actually in the second batch of Manipal the medical college. My father was the fourth batch, I think, or fifth batch. He went to England and became a GP over there, and then brought my father along. And so I grew up in England. So yeah, my father, although he was a general practitioner, which itself was great, also had that bug of being an entrepreneur. And so alongside his practice later, as I was growing up, he set up a nursing home. And then he came back to India and set up a diagnostics clinic. So I guess it's in the family.
It's in the family, yeah. I was just going to ask. So it's really interesting. I mean, so there seems to be a strong... So a lot of people think it's all genetics, but what I'm now understanding from you, it's not just genetic. It's about spending time. It's association, and seeing them and spending time with them. So it's more an acculturation process where you've been tuned to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One last thing that I want to mention about my father, because I think it really, really shaped me, and if I reflect on it, I think that's probably why I was so curious about everything, was the fact that he himself always asked the question why. So he started that diagnostics manufacturing company. It became a biotech company because he just kept asking, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? He would challenge his scientists, even though he was a doctor and not in the biotech world. He made them think bigger and bigger. And so that research translated into a biotech company that went IPO for a little later. And so, yeah, that question of why is always at the heart of everything that I do.
Wow.
Why are we doing this? Why is this the right thing? It's not just how and what.
Wow. So I think if there's one big takeaway for today, it's already ask a lot of questions, especially starting with why. And if you're a parent, please allow your children to break things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. At least, even if they can't put it together, back together. Yeah. So this whole thing about coming back to India and then trying to, build something here. How did that, what's the inspiration? Where did this idea come from? Or was it just a natural progression of having run a company for a few years? Now, let me do something.
It's funny. I mean, it's very tempting to look at who I am today, right? On paper, it sounds very impressive. I'm the founder of thub and, we've done all these big things. And now I'm, managing partner at a new venture studio. It was not a straight line path. I did not know that I would get to where I am today. I have actually done many different things without a clear path for what I was going to do next. It's more a series of experiments, I think. Wow. I didn't think of it that way when I was doing them, but that's what it really was. Okay. So out of college, my father had the diagnostics company that I was talking about. And one of the things that I realized was that all of the chemicals in those days were being imported from the UK. And so an opportunity presented itself to become the distributor of those chemicals for other diagnostic companies in the UK. And so that was my first experiment into entrepreneurship. It did okay, not great. The Chinese came, flooded the market, and so we got out of that business. Then, of course, there was the whole body shopping thing that happened. For those of the younger guys who don't know what that is, it's basically training people in India on software solutions like ERP, CRM, getting them jobs in the US. And so my roommate from college had set up a company in the US and was placing people and realized that we need to train more people here. And so I helped him run that over here, and that also exited. Then I was like, what do I do next? I've sent all these people to the US. Let me go see what's going on over there, especially this whole Silicon Valley thing. What is this? It was new in those days, that whole concept, right? And so I moved to the US and started as a consultant in the ERP and telecom space because that's what I knew. Again, one accident led me to become a product manager. I didn't think I knew what it was to be a product manager. The hiring manager thought I could do it, so I did it. Wow. And so I was in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom and bust thanks to this piece, with a lot of our friends, colleagues, etc., starting startups. And that was my exposure to the startup world. And I fell in love with that whole piece, even though I was in corporate at the time. What I really liked about that was that people were giving up the safety of a salaried, safe job to do something that could change the world. And so that hit me that that's something that is really, really cool. Because I didn't become an entrepreneur. Yeah. I continued to do the IT thing for a while. Then I went back to India to help my father with his biotech company again. Yeah. Did that for a few years. And about 10 years ago, I was mentoring startups pro bono,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that, especially in those days in Hyderabad, a lot of them were technical in nature, very passionate, but didn't know how to build a business around it.
Mm.
I didn't know how to scale it. And so I was helping with that piece.
Okay.
And that kind of led to the, how do I build an ecosystem with an incubator? That led to T-Hub. We'll go into those details.
wow.
But my point is, it was a series of events that kind of
Events,
led from
yeah.
one thing to another. And all of that knowledge that I had culminated into what I did. I didn't know what that was going to be when I was 18, 20, 25.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I mean, so if I relate back to what Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you kind of are a great evidence of that.
Yeah.
I mean, so you also support it.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would say, if I were to give advice to other people based on my experiences, you may not know what you want to become, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I say that's okay because it tends to be a source of stress I've noticed among the younger generation right now.
Yeah.
They see Instagram influencers and they see all of these people who seem to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. What's going on? And they're stressed. You don't need to know. It's fine.
That's fine.
Right? But whatever it is that you are doing, do it deeply. Try and understand how that world works and apply yourself to it, because it's not easy to become good at it.
Yeah.
Learn as much as you can, and then if after all of that you realize this is not for you, it's fine to move on and do something different.
Yeah.
But apply yourself while you're doing it.
Yeah. So now we come to this really big piece. I mean, you founded T-Hub. What T-Hub is today is what everyone looks up to. It's like the heart of an ecosystem, etc. But where did you get the inspiration to think of this? Was it like, is this what you thought right up front, or is it again a series of experiments? You wanted to do something. What's the inspiration? Why did you want to do something like this? And where did you get the idea for this?
So first of all, when you say founder of T-Hub, it sounds like I did everything. It definitely was not that at all. There was a whole group of people who helped to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
The idea itself came from the previous IT minister, Mr. K.T. Ramarao. He's the one who said, he came to me at ISB, actually. We had a meeting at ISB along with the then Dean of ISB to say, how do we put Hyderabad on the map? We have a lot of the ingredients, and yet it's not all there. How do we attract the youth to come and work here? How do we attract large corporates to come and work out of here? Innovation is one of those pieces that was missing and can invigorate a city. And so he said, what do we do to put Hyderabad on the map? That is what became T-Hub, right? The experiences that I had that helped me to put these thoughts together and create what became T-Hub. One was just that like I said, that series of experiments. What it enabled was I understood different cultures. I understood the UK, I understood the US, I understood India.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could think globally in that sense. I understood different domains. I was in healthcare, I was in software, I was in multiple things in that sense. And so I could bring all that together. I'd cultivated networks. I'm someone that loves to understand what makes people tick. And so whenever I meet people, I'm always asking deeper questions and staying in touch with those people.
Wow.
And so I had this network of people as well, right? And all of that came to bear over here. And as part of my whole reading, one of the things if you remember, I said that prior to T-Hub, I had done, I'd been running the IIIT Hyderabad incubator.
Yeah.
And that itself was an experiment in how do you build community for a city. Prior to that, globally, the ecosystems that existed had been built on their own, organically.
Yeah.
Whether you talk about Silicon Valley or even Bangalore, no one really got together and said, how do we build this?
Right.
There was a guy called Brad Feld. So Brad's a venture capital guy, prolific investor. He had moved from Silicon Valley after the dot-com bust to Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
Right? And he turned that into a little hotbed of activity. And he wrote a book called Startup Communities.
Yes.
And so I'd read that book, and he talked about how do you build an ecosystem from scratch. And I read the thing and I was like, well, it's fairly complex. But the one thing that he said that resonated was, there is a place in the world for connectors. And I thought I could do that. I could help connect people. And I could use my product management, product strategy, business development background to help entrepreneurs to help themselves. Because at a college incubator, you don't have too much resource. There's not a lot of money. You don't have much of a team. But you can run all of this. How do you help founders to help each other? And so those are the experiments I ran at AAAT. We went from, I think it was 13 startups at the beginning to about 75 in a year and a half. And far more importantly, a whole bunch of them started to get customers, started to get funding. One got acquired even. And so that's what led to Mr. BVR Mohan Reddy, who's the founder of a company called Scient, was on the board at AAAT. He was the one who spoke to KTR and said, you should talk to Srinivas as well as the ISB folks, and see what can we do. And so that was that's what led to all of this, was just thinking that I even told the minister at the time, I don't know how to do this. I know the theory of it. I can tell you what we did at AAAT. Let's make an attempt at this.
Yeah. It looks like it's been a very successful attempt, at least. Great, congratulations. So T-Hub, so let me go back and ask this question. So entrepreneurs always get confused when they look at so many people now trying to service them. So everybody, as you rightly mentioned, a few years ago, nobody wanted to be an entrepreneur because, as you mentioned sometime earlier when we were discussing, parents wouldn't want them to stay in that field when they cross 26, 27, because probably wouldn't get a bride or a bridegroom or something like that. So from there, we've come a long way where everyone wants to deal with entrepreneurs today. And so there's just too many people telling them too many things.
Yes.
So you have incubators, you have accelerators, you have, venture studios. You have angels, you have VC firms,
Sure.
you have all sorts of people telling them, you know what, you should come to us and we can help you. And then the entrepreneurs sometimes make the mistake of going to the wrong person. So can you help us demystify, a little bit, how should the entrepreneur find who they should go to at what stage, who these various actors are, and if you were to put T-Hub on that list of actors, because it doesn't look like a clean fit in either an incubator or an accelerator.
That's right.
And so on. So could you help us kind of understand this ecosystem piece a little bit more?
Sure. So the first thing I would start with is the entrepreneur themselves, because they're at the heart of all of this, right? One thing I would say is, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to put in the work and figure things out for yourself. I say that because the minute, for example, when a government entity is involved, some people just assume that the government owes them their success. So the government must invest in them, the government must help them with contacts, etc. Right? That's not the spirit of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur has to be someone who rolls up his sleeves and gets things done. Having said that, help is always valuable along the way. And there are multiple players, like you said, who can help you to scale your company. And they all have their place in the ecosystem. You have, at one end, you have the incubator. The incubator is typically a space that you can work out of, and a community of other startups that are out of that space. They will make connections to mentors, investors, etc. And it's on you to use all of those resources to scale. Right? You have accelerators. So accelerators typically are short-term programs that are cohort-based. So they take in a batch of 10 startups, for example, or 150 if you're Y Combinator. And there's a structured curriculum that you go through over that 3-month period of time that walks you through business development, marketing, design, whatever, all these different elements, right? In that case, a lot of accelerators also put money into each startup. But again, it's on the entrepreneur to use all of those resources and scale, but it's a short-term program. So that's the incubator and the accelerator. Obviously, you may need funding, and of course, that's a whole other thing. There are angel investors, seed funds, venture capital, all the way up to PE funds. As an entrepreneur, it behooves you to figure out what help do you need. First of all, right? Do you need business development help? Do you need technology help? Do you need advice on just building a company? What are you willing to give up for that help? Are you willing to give up equity? Once you've answered that, it'll tell you which model fits. Also, what stage are you at?
Yeah.
So, is an incubator right for you? Is an accelerator right for you? They're all low-touch models in a sense. It's all on you to do that building. Look at the different incubators and accelerators that exist. Look at the sort of mentors they have on board. Look at the sort of other companies that are in that space, and then make a choice. Does this fit you? Will you be able to take advantage of what they give you? All of these are low touch, like I said. The other model that you mentioned is the venture studio. That's much more hands-on. Venture studios are institutional co-founders. And so if you're a startup that's in early days, or you're even a founder with an idea, you could apply to a venture studio, but know that a venture studio will take more equity from you, but also give you a lot more support. It's an entire team that comes on board to help you build it. And a whole bunch of unicorns have come out of venture studios simply because they have the ability to execute alongside you and have done this day in, day out over, in some cases, hundreds of ideas. And so their team is well set. They know what it takes to scale. They stop you making the most obvious mistakes that startups make along the way. Then, of course, there are people like T-Hub, like you mentioned. So T-Hub is different because it's an ecosystem enabler. The idea is to build an ecosystem, right? And again, an ecosystem is a word that's loosely used. It tends to be a flat-sounding word like ecosystem. But it's actually a rich network of different stakeholders, all of whom are looking, in this case, to work with startups. You have corporates, you have government, you have investors, you've got mentors and advisors, you've got incubators and accelerators, you've got all these different people, right? But each of them is looking to engage with a startup for different reasons. They have different ideas of what they want to get out of it. And so T-Hub's job is to, first of all, make sure that that's a rich network for Telangana initially, and then build out that model for the country. What that means is, for example, our early days of T-Hub, there were only, I want to say, 4 incubators in the city, which is not enough. You need more because there's so many entrepreneurs that want to do it. So my first tagline for T-Hub was actually, we're an incubator of incubators. And so our first job was how to get more incubators out there, from getting central government funding to setting up, to telling them how to be scalable, etc. We had to get investors involved. We had a lot of high net worth individuals, most of whom were not aware of how to invest into a startup. And so we literally ran programs that would teach investors to invest into startups. What does that even mean? How do you do, portfolio management? What to expect? You can't expect an interest rate or a rate of return at all. We worked with corporates. How do we get corporate innovation to become something that happens in India? A lot of it was happening abroad. They want access to technology, but can we facilitate the connections between the corporate and the startups themselves in various ways, all those different programs? Can we help other governments to build out their ecosystems? So T-Hub is doing all of those things. On top of that, it has its own incubator. It runs accelerator programs. It runs direct programs. But it's also building out the entire ecosystem. That's why it's different.
So when you look at this most famous ecosystem, which we all go back to, and you also mentioned you spent some time there, the Silicon Valley ecosystem. It seems to have taken many, many decades to come into being. It's sort of built very organically by itself. Nobody seems to have orchestrated the development of that ecosystem. While today we're trying to decipher how did that actually come into being. But it doesn't seem to have been orchestrated of sorts. At least it doesn't come across that way. While on the other end, you've taken up an experiment where you've tried to kind of seed the basis for creation of an ecosystem and played the pivotal role of saying, hey, I just don't want to be another incubator, but pushing T-Hub to think of itself as why don't we be the seed creator of a larger ecosystem? So now we're looking at probably two models of ecosystem creation. Do you see that any differences, or which is more applicable for a country like India? Which would be better? Because if we keep waiting for those natural ecosystems to happen, they will. But yeah, they're far and few. There's one in the U.S.
Mm.
In 50 years or so, and the rate at which India has ambitions to grow by 2047 and so on. What do you think is this model that we need? And from your experience, can we orchestrate the creation, or can we actually create ecosystems?
You definitely, the answer is yes, you can create ecosystems, but it will take a long time for them to mature. You talked about T-Hub, having made a large impact. We're halfway through our journey. What I told the minister when we started was this is at least a 20-year journey. We're only 10 years in. We've made a good start. There's a long way to go, right? To your point about Silicon Valley being the right model for India, Silicon Valley is an area.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy is closer between Silicon Valley and Bangalore because they're both startup centers, investment centers, etc. Right? If you talk about countries, there was a movement called the Rise of the Rest that was orchestrated by Steve Case, who was one of the founders of AOL, right? And his thing was, as a country, you can't rely on one city alone.
True.
Or one region alone. Entrepreneurs are coming from across the country. How do you enable all of them? And they're all valuable. So, it's LA for media, it's New York for a whole bunch of things. It's, all of these, and now a whole bunch of cities are coming up. That's the analogy for India as well. While you have a Bangalore, and there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences also between Bangalore and Silicon Valley, I don't think the point is just that. India needs a lot more than just one central zone.
Yeah.
And it's happening. We have obviously the big cities.
Yeah.
But more and more startups are being created in tier 2 towns. I think that's what we need.
Yeah.
Even for T-Hub, one of the first questions that we got asked and have been continually asked is, where does Hyderabad stand compared to Bangalore? You're far behind. Well, yeah, we're far behind. That's fine. That's not the purpose. The purpose is not to beat Bangalore.
Yeah.
The purpose is, can we enable every entrepreneur in this ecosystem to reach their potential? If we do that, we've succeeded. Wow. Obviously, as a result of doing that, and again, this is the whole, one of the things I do is I keep applying startup principles to everything I do. So even at the ecosystem level, there's this principle of nail it, then scale it, right? Do your stuff well, and it'll scale anyway. Wow. That's where we're at right now. We need to nail it and scale it across multiple cities in India, not just one Bangalore or a Bombay, Delhi. How do we enable much more cities to come up, and how do we enable entrepreneurs to funnel through that? Maybe they'll go to Bangalore eventually because a lot of the capital exists there. But they should be able to build companies out of anywhere in the country. That's the model we need. More and more people are going to become micro entrepreneurs.
Right.
VC entrepreneurship is not the only model.
True.
AI is disrupting many, many things. It'll disrupt many, many jobs. What happens to all those people? Opportunities for micro entrepreneurship hopefully will come up.
Yeah.
So that's one of the hypotheses we have.
Very interesting. You did mention, I think more than once, that entrepreneurs need to choose their opportunities very carefully, and I think that becomes really important because in India you just have to turn anywhere and you see a plethora of opportunities. I mean, we are a growing country, we're ambitious, aspirational, so there's this opportunities galore. I mean, it's just all over the place. How does an entrepreneur, a founder, find that fit, saying, hey, this is the opportunity that I must go after? So any tips, suggestions from your experience on that?
It's a great question. What I find is very often founders are looking at what's sexy, looking at what's cool. So AI is the thing. Let's build an AI startup, right? And what that doesn't matter. Usually that doesn't go very well. You do need to figure out what problem you want to solve. So there are 3 questions that I always ask of a founder that comes to me with either a startup or an idea, right? What problem are you solving? Who are you solving it for? And why you, right? Um, Usually they don't have an answer. I mean, they seem like simple questions, but all of those need to be clearly defined. The why you part, I think, is important. It must be understood that startups are not glamorous. Right? It's very tempting to look at, the let's say any of the big founders, right? Whether it's Bhavesh Agarwal or whoever, and think, wow, I could be a billionaire. You don't realize it's the hardest thing you can do. Startups are never a straight line. It's never easy. You're going to go through massive downs as well. It's one of the loneliest jobs you can have because you can't talk to your family about it. You can't talk to your team about it because you're supposed to be inspiring them. Your friends who have jobs won't understand it. It is really hard. It is really lonely. If you are not passionate about the problem you're solving, you're probably going to give up too early. And tenacity and lasting it out is important in this space. So when you're looking, if you're at the stage of looking for an idea to build a startup around, strong suggestions are find something that you care about, find a set of people that you know, study them for their problem, deeply understand how that problem plays out for them, figure out how they're solving it today and how you're going to do it better. You have to have some emotional connection to the problem and ideally some life experience connection to the problem as well. If your background has been all in commerce, but now you're building a biotech company, obviously it won't work, right? But that I see that too often.
Okay.
Figure out what your unique advantage to solving that problem is.
Let me ask you a couple of short, quick questions, if you'd like to answer
Sure.
and see. So, if you were a startup entrepreneur, and what are the big spaces in India that you're seeing, emergent spaces where entrepreneurship is going to play a key role, which are kind of exploding? I mean, which probably others are missing because, they just don't see it. Or other way to put it is, the kind of trends or spaces that entrepreneurs should watch so that they would probably get to see some interesting opportunities.
I think, first of all, I don't think there are any spaces that are untouched. Innovation and disruption are happening across every industry out there, from healthcare to agriculture to space. It's happening all over. As an entrepreneur, stick to what you know. Don't just go for what's hot right now. Look for things where, again, like you said, you can build some kind of some form of moat that stops other people from building something similar. But I don't think there's one particular industry. All of them are being disrupted simultaneously. Just think about the way to look at it is what technologies are being disrupted today, and how can you apply them to existing businesses to make them more efficient, bigger, better, etc.
Okay, nice, interesting. So go out with a tool and then search for the problems that you like.
So if you're a technology person, that's the way you would go. The other way to go, obviously, is just find a big problem that needs solving and seeing which technology applies to that. Too many people start with the technology first and then can't figure out how to sell it.
So that problem persists
in fact,
over decades.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the interesting things right now that we've been thinking through is the fact that technology is no longer going to be the differentiator for many companies, right? It is definitely premature, but there's been this whole talk about the downfall of SaaS, for example, right? Because in theory, you could give a few prompts to an AI engine and it would code that application for you. I don't think it's that dire yet, but the point is that technologies are disrupting many things. Distribution and understanding of your customer is going to be the differentiator.
Wow.
If you can understand your customer deeply and get those insights that other people don't have, and you can figure out how to distribute that across different ways, the technology is relatively simple.
Wow.
In many cases. Again, I'm avoiding hardware-related stuff. I'm avoiding the deep tech stuff. But in theory, your knowledge of customer and distribution will make a big difference.
So I think the key point that you're making, and I think it's really important here, is that understanding the customer becomes extremely critical as we go along, because
Yes.
it's no more just the technology that makes all the difference as in the past.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. T-Hub's biggest successes and biggest non-successes or failures in the entrepreneurship world.
So the non-successes I won't even talk about, right? And the reason is, as I said, our job is being an ecosystem enabler.
Yeah.
We're not an incubator ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not a venture studio. We're
Yeah.
not, the idea is to build the ecosystem and
Yeah.
enable. The point was this, in fact, startups will always fail because they're trying to disrupt things that, haven't been disrupted for a while.
Yeah.
There is business model risk anyway,
Yeah.
and execution risk.
Yeah.
What they should not fail because of is because they couldn't get hold of a mentor, they couldn't get hold of a customer, they couldn't get hold of an investor.
Yeah.
We should remove that from there. And so if people fail, it's okay. It's not a big deal, right? With the successes, again, there's two ways to look at that answer. One is the ones that directly worked through T-Hub.
Yeah.
And then just Hyderabad startups in general, because they've all benefited from T-Hub putting Hyderabad on the startup map, T-Hub making it a space where innovation can happen. We have, in theory, 3 unicorns right now in Hyderabad. We have High Radius, we have Darwin Box, and we have Zenoti. And we've got quite a few more coming up in the ranks. The quality of startups and entrepreneurs now versus 10 years ago when we started T-Hub is exponentially better.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot to be proud of.
Yeah. So the biggest success is putting Hyderabad on the map. I think that's the biggest success.
Yeah,
And I think,
I
that's
think
made a
so.
big difference. Yeah.
Because it helps all entrepreneurs,
Yeah,
right?
it
There's
helps
that thing about how a rising tide,
Yeah. It helps everyone.
Correct.
Yeah. Fantastic. I've often heard of this anti-portfolio idea in VCs. So I was just curious, did you see something like that happen either at Biome or earlier at T-Hub, where a great opportunity passed by?
No, unfortunately, this question doesn't even apply to us because Biome is a new company.
Yeah, it's a startup.
We can't go there yet. And T-Hub wasn't investing.
Directly?
So we weren't investing directly.
Yeah.
We're just about the ecosystem.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't really apply to us.
That doesn't apply to you. Okay. What do you think about this unicorn race in India? I mean, today a lot of focus is on the unicorns, and I think we also discussed this a little bit earlier, saying that entrepreneurship of every kind is important for a nation.
Yes.
But then there's this huge emphasis or attention, at least, given to unicorns and not really to the others. So, is this valuation or approach healthy, or should we need to balance this in a better way? And what could that way be?
So in general, I don't think that the race to create unicorns for the sake of creating unicorns is of value. In fact, it can be detrimental in some ways. It was useful in one way. For example, Flipkart, right, was the first unicorn we had. There was lots of talk about how the founders had become billionaires. What that made possible was allowing people to become entrepreneurs and want to aspire to be an entrepreneur. Not just for themselves, but for their families. The anecdote I gave earlier was that when I first started this ecosystem journey 12 years back or 13 years back or whatever it was, maybe more, all my entrepreneurs were in their early 20s and would say, by the time I'm 27, I have to have succeeded. Otherwise, I have to quit being an entrepreneur because no one will marry an entrepreneur. That's not the case anymore. It's considered to be, if not glamorous, at least something that is not looked down on.
True.
That's what the unicorn success of Flipkart enabled. Today, though, I think if you're focused only on pumping money into a company and making it a unicorn, not focusing on, is it really solving a problem for a set of customers that are willing to pay for it in a way that is profitable, it is not going to sustain. I don't want to, really hang on to something that's everyone's hanging on to right now, or piling onto, which is Baiju's. But I mean, look at that. That's a terrible example for everybody. It clearly wasn't solving a need truly in the right way. It was given a ton of money that made more bad decisions. Again, I'm not blaming the capital alone, but purely giving capital to something that doesn't deserve it yet is not always the right approach.
Yeah.
So always focus, I would always focus on solving a real problem for someone that really needs it and therefore will pay you for it. And then valuation will come, as opposed to just pushing the valuation up.
So is it time that we came up with better metrics to start bucketing entrepreneurs, saying, hey, you're also successful? Because we're talking about micro-entrepreneurship, we're talking about entrepreneurship of everyday entrepreneurs who really bring value to society. So, yeah, are there some interesting metrics you've come across which is more helpful?
Yeah. So every industry has metrics already. And it's India's now a much more mature startup ecosystem. In the beginning, it wasn't as evolved. But today, depending on which industry you're in, there are clearly defined metrics that talk about how successful that startup is. I don't think that's a problem. The media will always focus on the big stories. It will always focus on the big numbers. It will always focus on the unicorns because that's what sounds glamorous. That you can't change, I don't think. But as long as people understand true metrics of growth for a startup, at its heart, I don't think there's a problem.
Interesting. What's the biggest mistake you see founders do, especially in the early stages, which they can probably, now that you've seen thousands of them, say, hey, when you see yourself, catch yourself doing this, stop it.
We've addressed a few of those already in the conversation. For example, one is not having, those three questions: what problem you're solving, who you're solving for, why. Just not having clarity is a big mistake, right? If you don't truly understand your customer first, the problem they're facing and how they're solving it and how you're going to do it differently, it's not going to work out. The second one oftentimes is in conjunction with that one. You're building something, you have attachment to that, you don't let it go. You just keep going. The zombie startup. It's dead, but it doesn't know it. It's a balance, though, because some startups require that tenacity. You have to stay because you've got some insight into it, and it just takes time. So knowing when to quit is another really, really important one.
Wow.
Knowing when to stay in and knowing when to quit. It's a fine line.
Yeah. So that's a big lesson to learn, all entrepreneurs and founders. Yeah, learn when to quit. And I know quitting is not bad anymore.
Yeah.
Thanks to Srinivas.
But the biggest one is just not having a focus on your customer.
Yeah.
Like, there's a startup saying, again, get out of the building. If you are sitting in your office building your product all the time without talking to your customers continuously, it will not work out for you.
So if you spend too much time trying to stay in your office. So if you catch yourself sitting too many days in your office in a row, just get out. Yeah. So coming to this last question that I have for you, Srinivas. B school graduates have their own set of, worries and anxieties as they go through school. Some of them do try their hands at entrepreneurship, but there's always a little bit of resistance. Traditionally, most of these students land up in, conventional roles at large corporations, which don't probably give them an opportunity to see what's going on in the world. So as a person who's taken a very unconventional, non-traditional route through your career and ended up doing very interesting things, what would be your advice to today's business school students or aspiring business school students to look at careers?
I would start with know yourself, right? And I say that because there's a tendency to try and fit the mold. So you see what your batchmates are doing, you see what your friends are doing, and you want to do that same thing. But not everybody is the same. And so understand who you are. Are you an entrepreneur at heart? Are you more of a 9-to-5 person at heart? There's nothing wrong with either of those routes. Figure out who you are, what you want, and then use that to define the sort of company you want to work for and the sort of job. That's the first. The second part is optimize for learning. Don't optimize for salary in the beginning. It's too early. Think about, again, you don't have to have a clear understanding of what you'll be in 50 years' time or 20 years' time, but a direction, and optimize for where you learn the most that will get you there. Don't optimize for salary in the beginning. That will come. Become really, really good at something. Money follows.
Wow. Thanks for that. It was fantastic talking to Srinivas. If there are a couple of things to take away, one, understand entrepreneurship is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Ensure you work very, very hard. It's not an easy game. The glamour is just the little piece that you see on top. The large piece is like the iceberg at the bottom. So be ready for the heavy work. And last but not the least, please hold on to opportunities that you care about. It's not about creating anything and everything. It's about creating something that you truly care for. So thank you, Srinivas. Fantastic talking with you. Thanks for taking time and being with us today.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, pleasure.